Some people spend years planning a wedding,
Yeah.
but they completely neglect the preparation and planning of the lifelong commitment of marriage.
You're preparing for one day instead of preparing for a lifetime.
Welcome back to Intentional Rising. I'm Jennifer, one of your hosts.
And I'm Festus, your co-host.
How's your week going?
It's going.
We just had our first event.
Yeah. Yeah.
We did a live podcast recording on Valentine's
We
Day.
got to get that out soon.
Yeah, that's got to be edited and all the things, but it was so good.
Yeah. It was called True Love Waits. And we just went over everything. Well, not everything, but some story and then a little bit about get insight into the waiting season.
Yeah.
It was cool. And we only had 2 weeks to plan it. So
Yeah, because when the Lord
yeah.
says to do something, you just do it. But all we really needed there was his presence, and it was definitely in the room. We collaborated with Ludi and Luis
Right.
from With Truth and Love. You guys know them from this channel.
Yeah.
And we have already set a date for the next one. So
That's
it
right.
is going to be April 25th.
Set your calendars.
Stay tuned for more details. Again,
Yeah.
it's going to be in Miami area. We haven't ventured out yet, but God willing, maybe we'll be able to
Pretty soon.
do an
Yeah.
out of state event sometime
Hopefully
in the
soon.
near future.
Yeah.
As we were preparing
Mm-hmm.
we were debriefing on the event, and then
Yeah.
the Lord had already given a name for the next one. So the first one was True Love Waits. The next one is going to be True Love Prepares. So
Yeah.
preparing for the promise. So we started working on that and kind of brainstorming,
Mm-hmm.
and the topic for this video came up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so
We're
the
talking about what?
topic is preparing for a wedding versus prepare for a marriage, because there's a big difference.
Yeah.
And so we are going to dive into that and break that down
Let's do it.
today.
All right.
Before we get started, do us a favor. Like, comment, subscribe, share this video. It's going to
Share
be
it.
good. It's not just for people that are engaged, it's also for the single people. We are going to touch on both.
Yeah.
So definitely share this with a friend.
Mm-hmm. All right. Let's get into it. Wedding versus marriage.
So when we were in our preparation season,
Yeah.
do you think we did a good job preparing for a marriage versus preparing for a wedding?
So you're saying the preparation season as when we were engaged?
Yeah.
Okay. I think we did a good job. I think we could have done a better job. I think we did a good job because even, before we were engaged, we were in all classes, right?
That's true.
So we were preparing for marriage, but even after we were engaged, we continued those premarital classes. And you even had me sit down with the pastor that was going to marry us and talk
That's true.
about having friends that are females, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So we were doing a lot of the work. I think as it got closer to the wedding day, just all the things that had go into having a wedding kind of took up a lot of that time. So I don't think we were as good as the wedding got closer as we were
Yeah.
before
I think we
in
could
preparing
have
for the
been
marriage.
praying more, fasting
Right.
more, all of those
Right.
things, reading our word more, but you get so wrapped up in the details of the wedding and planning all of
Yeah.
these things. And so we want to get into that
Mhm.
because it's common in our culture that some people spend years planning a wedding,
Yeah.
but they completely neglect the preparation and planning of the lifelong commitment of marriage.
Right. Right. You're preparing for one day instead of preparing for a lifetime.
Yeah, so that brings us to the first point of preparing for something temporary, like a wedding,
Hmm.
versus preparing for something eternal. So having a temporary perspective versus an eternal perspective.
Yeah.
And so that's the first point we want to touch on, because I think the reason the eternal perspective gets so neglected is because of the way that culture is so big on just the celebration of marriage and not so much the binding covenant, the
Right.
spiritual aspect of marriage. And
Right.
so it's not just a celebration,
No, no, not at all. The celebration is great, but you can't prioritize the celebration over the lifelong commitment.
right?
Right.
And so when you're prioritizing the celebration, you're thinking about all of those temporary details, all of the aesthetics, all of the, vanity, the dress, all of these things that are for one day
Yeah.
instead of lifelong. And lifelong meaning the vows that you commit to,
Yeah.
the till death do us
Yeah.
part, in
Yeah.
sickness and in health, for better or worse.
Right, and you'll even find that some people, they go through putting all the work in preparing for all these things, and then the day of or the day before is when they decide that they're gonna sit down and write their vows. Like, you didn't prioritize the important part of the marriage, the important thing, which is your actual vows, but you prioritize the wedding dress, the venue, all these other
Okay,
things.
I feel like you're coming for me because I
Am I?
wrote my vows the night before we got married.
There you go.
But wait a minute. That is because I in during those days I have been delivered from this, but I was a very anxious overthinker. And so I was
Yeah.
really overthinking
Oh,
those
yeah,
vows.
for sure.
And it just because
Yo.
he's such a good writer, just like even when he would write me
Hey,
cards,
look, I
I'm
had to
like,
write 2 vows.
because he wrote vows for our daughter too.
Yeah.
But I was like, especially if he goes first. Did you go
I
first with
went
your
first,
vows?
and the first thing you said after I was done was like, "How do y'all expect me to follow that?" She
He's
comes up
so good.
she comes up like, I said mine, and then
That's
she
why I
comes up and
was
is like,
so
"How am I supposed to follow
nervous.
that?"
That's why I was so nervous. Hey, you were an English major
I was at
before
one
you
point.
decided
Yeah,
nursing.
yeah.
So you are much better with words than I am. He still is to this day. He writes me beautiful, like love notes and all of those things. So that is a gift that I did not have, but I still think I did pretty
You
good
still did
with
pretty
my
good. No,
vows.
you did, you did, you did.
Okay.
Yeah.
So as I was preparing for this, I was reading through scripture and in Matthew chapter 16, where let me pull up 16, verse 9. That whole
Mhm.
chapter, Jesus is talking. The Pharisees are questioning him about marriage and divorce and all of these things. And so Jesus is clearing things up for them and talking to them about marriage and divorce. So Matthew 19, verse 6. So then they are no longer two, but one flesh. Therefore, what God has joined together, let no man separate. That was actually one of the scriptures that I think it
That
was
that was
engraved
my
on
that was in my
our rings
vows.
too.
Yeah, it
Yeah.
was in my vows too. Yeah.
Yeah. So then the Pharisees asked him in verse 7, they said to him, why then did Moses command to give a certificate of divorce and to put her away? And he said to them, Moses, because of the hardness of your hearts, permitted you to divorce your wives, but from the beginning it was not so. And so I began to reflect on the from the beginning it was not so.
Mhm.
When God created Adam and Eve, before sin and hardness of heart and all of these things entered into the picture, there was no divorce.
Right, right.
Like, there was no, there was only
Who
them.
else are you gonna go
So
to?
who you gonna go to? Like,
Like, you can divorce, but you're gonna be staying by yourself.
so the
It's gonna
way
be you and the
that
Lord.
God created marriage and created it, there was never an intention for you to separate.
Right, right,
And the reason that came into Mosaic law is because there the people were sinful and they had hardened hearts and they were leaving their wives for no reason and all of these things. So there had to be some type of established allow. And so what God was saying is that they allowed it, they permitted it because of the sinful nature of the Israelites' hearts, but it was never meant to be that. It wasn't a commandment.
right.
So it was allowed under certain circumstances, not that you could just leave your wife for any reason. It was permitted in situations of adultery and things like that.
Yeah, even I like that it says because their hearts were hardened, right? Because I think a lot of people sometimes now, like divorce is so common that they go through divorce and or they go through the thought process of divorcing and they are more focused on what he did or what she did. And, even when they are praying to God, if they're Christians, they're not praying for a softened heart, right? Because I think a softened heart would solve so much of their problems and may even prevent that
Yeah,
divorce, and so it's interesting that it says because of their hardened hearts, it was
right.
permitted.
Because the hardness of the heart is the biggest issue
Yeah.
with a lot of conflict in marriage.
Mhm.
And I mean, I've been there, we've been there where
Yeah.
you need to apologize, but
Right.
you, like, have
Right.
that hardened heart towards,
And I think
your
that's what
spouse
that's when
and
you just gotta go to God and be like, "God, please soften my
soften
heart.
my heart.
Please soften my heart." So much of so often we're just thinking, "Oh, I gotta apologize," or "She's gotta apologize," and you are just getting into your head about it, and you don't wanna do certain things when you can just go to God and be like, "Please just soften my heart," because that apology, anything like that, it comes out so much more natural and so much more genuine when you have the soft heart. Because you can apologize all you want, but if your heart is not softened, it comes across as you just
Yeah,
doing it to do
yeah.
it.
It's not a genuine apology, and
Yeah,
we all know what it's like to receive one of those. You might
right,
as well
right.
not even waste your
Those
breath.
"I'm sorry, but"
The "but" part.
Right,
Just say,
right.
"I'm
The
sorry."
the "but" negates everything you said before that.
Oh, we've all been there. But
Yeah,
anyway, I want to so for people who are already engaged, if you have not done premarital counseling, sat down with your pastor, godly counsel, anything like that, don't spend all this time and investment in the details of the
right.
actual wedding celebration that's for one day. People show up for the food
Yeah,
and the drinks,
yeah,
and then they're gone, and you are now the rest of your life with this person that you are marrying, and it's you haven't done the work, you haven't prepared spiritually, you haven't done the premarital counseling. There's so much that comes up in premarital counseling
right, right,
that I definitely, even if you're serious with someone, even before you're engaged, I think
right.
us doing premarital counseling before we are engaged, I mean, I'm speaking for myself,
Yeah,
but you can speak to it too.
yeah,
It gave me more assurance before we had made that decision. Because once you buy a ring, once you say yes, all of those things, there's so much more pressure
right,
to
right.
stay in that
Right,
relationship.
and I think even us doing it before we actually were engaged was both of us seeing that there's a commitment. Like we're dating with intention, right?
Yeah,
It wasn't just if I get engaged to, then we'll kind of move into that. It was more like it's kind of like we were both thinking the same way. We're both going the same way. So when we brought that up, it wasn't a struggle for us to both agree to go into it. And I think if you're dating somebody and you have to be seriously dating, right? And you're seriously dating and that topic comes up and there's such a struggle, there shouldn't be a struggle because if there is a struggle, that tells you that one of you is not dating with intention,
right. With
right?
the intention to
With the
marry.
intention to
Yeah.
marry, right? So if
Because going to premarital counseling, that doesn't mean we are getting
no,
married
there are people that went through premarital that counseling
and
and
realize,
realized that marriage
yeah,
is not for them right now. Like it wasn't time for that.
yeah, yeah,
So it actually opens your eyes up a lot more to what marriage really is. And then you might be like, you know what? This is not for us right now.
yeah,
And so that's why I think it really was important. I'm glad that we actually went into it. And I had to sacrifice, right? I had to come. I was in New York working, and I would
yeah.
come in every weekend just to go to that. But I think what it did show you is that I was committed.
And we weren't the only couple that wasn't
Oh
engaged yet.
yeah,
There was another couple that wasn't engaged, and they ended up getting engaged during the
yeah,
process, just like we did.
yeah.
So it was definitely worth it.
Right,
So, you've hired a wedding planner, you've done all these things, but you haven't done premarital counseling. Rethink all of that. Take it to
right.
the Lord. Sign up for some premarital counseling, and it's going to be wonderful for
And
you.
I think you have to even go into it with some excitement because you think about the excitement that you walked into your wedding planner's office with, you better walk into the premarital classes with that same kind of excitement,
Yeah.
right? You can't go into it like, "Oh, well, I gotta do this, I'm gonna do that." And then so that means you're more excited about the wedding than you are about the actual marriage.
Which is one
One
day,
day
and it
compared to a lifetime.
comes and goes so fast.
Yeah.
For me, I wasn't as big on a wedding. I wanted to just go to the courthouse, and I've talked about that before. There was
Yeah.
other reasons for that because, we were waiting
Other
till marriage
reasons.
to have sex. And once you're engaged, it gets a lot harder to remain pure. So I was like, "Can
Yeah.
we just go to the courthouse? Nobody has to know. Let's
I was
just go
like,
get
"Look,
married."
man, you told me on the second date we're waiting, so we gonna wait."
And he stuck by that. But
Yeah,
I don't like planning events, and I didn't want to deal with the stress of planning a wedding. So there was a part of me that was more, I'm happy we had a wedding. It was a
yeah,
beautiful day. We have,
yeah.
beautiful memories from that. But
It's not for everybody.
it wasn't a big deal for
Yeah,
me.
yeah,
It never was. But I also wasn't one of those women who grew up fantasizing either about
right.
marriage and the white dress and all of these things. Cause honestly, I had like a very toxic mentality when it came to marriage and didn't know that I'd ever get married or that I even wanted that. So um, once I did come around to really wanting that and my heart changed, it was because God changed my heart. And
Right.
so my idea of marriage was more founded in biblical principles
Mhm.
because the desire only came from God. It wasn't something that I had desired prior to
Yeah,
meeting the Lord. And so it wasn't because of things I had seen on TV and fantasizing about a wedding. But I know that that is different. And
yeah,
for most women, it is something that they dream of and
right,
they.
right. But even though it like, for me, it wasn't something that I dreamt of, it was more of I know how important that is. I have a big family. We're African. We have, like, 2, 3 weddings, you know?
Weddings are big.
Yeah,
Yeah.
2, 3, 2, 3-day weddings, but I wanted to do it more for my mother and, for close family members, like, my grandmother loved weddings, like, you couldn't if even if she didn't know you, she was going to your wedding. So it was a way to give back to my mom in a way. And so for you to like agree with it, because she didn't want no big wedding or anything, and I got a huge family. So,
And
you
then
know,
when I found out that it was planning 2 events because
yeah,
we had to
yeah.
have the whole African
Traditional
ceremony,
wedding.
the
Yeah.
traditional the day before, I was like, "Oh,
Yeah.
no, let's go to the courthouse."
I kind of snuck that in slowly. Oh, by the way, the day before we might have to have a little
Oh, man.
ceremony there.
Yeah, but
But she was cool about it, and she agreed to it, and then, like, it wasn't something that you had planned, or something like you had dreamt about, but you were willing to compromise, and I think you easily compromised because you saw that that wasn't my priority. Yes, it was important to me, but it wasn't my priority.
yeah,
Yeah,
yeah. So, for my single people, preparing for marriage starts before you even meet whoever the one is. Like
yeah,
you can begin preparing yourself, preparing your heart, preparing spiritually, your foundations, all of those things, healing from past wounds, all of that happens during your single season before you even meet that person. And so definitely don't neglect
yeah,
doing any of that and then wait until you meet the person you want to marry. And now you get so wrapped up in the planning of that day and the planning of the wedding that you neglect some of the work that needs to be done to prepare for that lifelong
yeah.
commitment.
I think while you're single, you've gotta even keep in mind, always keep in the back of your mind that once I am engaged, there's a wedding and there's a marriage. A wedding is not a marriage, right? It's a day versus a lifetime. And so keep that in the back of your mind so that when you're engaged, you don't get so focused on, oh, I got to do this, I got to do that. Like the same energy that you go into the wedding with, you better go into the marriage with that same kind of energy. Like that, think about your wedding day, right? If something's about to go wrong, you're quick. Let me call the backup photographer. Let me call this person. Let me do this. You're going to fix it. You're not just going to walk out on your own wedding day,
Right.
right? So when you get into that marriage and something's going wrong, you better have that same energy and you better make sure that let me call this counselor, let me call this therapist, let me do this, let me do that, let me be able to try to fix it, right? Just the
As
way you
much
would,
as we are willing to fight to make
right?
sure that that day is
Perfect.
perfect,
You got to fight,
you have to be willing to fight to maintain your marriage as well.
right? Exactly.
So that's the first point. So The next one is cost.
Cost.
Financial costs versus spiritual and emotional investment.
Mm,
So we invest so much financially into that one day, into a wedding.
yeah.
But what amount of spiritual and emotional investment is going
Mm,
into that day?
mm,
And so I think that's another piece where people will spend thousands and thousands for a wedding, but then they don't want to invest whatever it costs to go through. Our church had premarital counseling
right.
for free, but that's not always the case.
Right.
But anything that you need to do that might cost you some money that has to do with the, building that foundation
Right.
is so much more important
Right.
than paying for a wedding planner or
Right.
whatever else you're going to pay for the actual day.
Right. If you're willing to spend all that money on your wedding, you should be willing to spend that money on premarital classes if you have to. Spend that money on marriage counseling when you're married. If there's an issue, you should be just as eager to spend the money on that if you're eager to spend the money on your wedding as well. I think another part of the cost is just investing. I think we've talked before about different things like the soul care book. Not everybody's gonna be able to afford a lot of different things, right? Because people live in different parts of the country.
Mm,
But I think what you can afford is small things like books, right?
right.
Whether it's a book like Soul Care that's going to help you with the emotional part of things, with the spiritual part of things, things that you need healing from and deliverance from. So invest in certain things like that. Investment is huge because it's not just for you; it's for your marriage. It's like a way of being able to care for your marriage before you're married.
Because there's also a lot of time that's invested, not in just the relationship, but in the planning of the wedding and all of that.
Mhm.
We invest a lot of time,
Right.
but how much time are you spending preparing for the actual marriage,
Yeah.
preparing for what comes the day after the wedding, the day after the celebration, and for the rest of your life? Don't neglect spending time on that, working on your communication skills with your
That's
partner,
big.
working on conflict resolution, working on discussing like your spiritual principles, reading your Bibles together, praying together, all of these things that are going to be so important in establishing a healthy foundation in your marriage.
Yeah.
But you're so wrapped up in investing all this time in the details of the wedding day that you neglect that. And I feel like I see that happen a lot. And
Yeah, I mean, the time, like, you don't get time back, right?
yeah,
The time that you have in in your single season, you've gotta hold on to that. You've gotta be able to use that wisely and steward that time
right,
in a proper way so to make sure that you are truly preparing for that marriage more than you are preparing for that wedding.
right.
Yeah.
Because then you get into the marriage and it takes you longer to begin to enjoy the marriage because you're now dealing with all these things that
That
you
you
should
should
have
have been
dealt
dealing
with
with. I
when
mean,
you were
for us,
single.
if I'm honest, communication was a big one,
Mhm.
right? Because I wasn't a great communicator. I kind of shut down. I don't like talking. So look at her looking at me like that.
Mhm. Yeah, yeah. Keep going. Keep going. Keep going.
But yeah, so that's something that I wish I would have worked on. Like we're always gonna be honest with you, and we're gonna speak from our flaws. I'm not gonna stand up here and be like, "Oh, I did it all perfect. I was a great communicator." No,
Because we
we did,
made so many
no, so
mistakes.
many mistakes. So that's what we're really speaking from is our mistakes. I wasn't a great communicator, and so I had to learn that you can't just shut down. That's what I've done when I was single, right? And it worked out for me. I didn't have anybody to be accountable to. But now you have a wife and you have a daughter. You can't just decide that I'm not talking to y'all. I'm just gonna go in my little bubble. you know? So I had to learn that, but I would have learned that during my single season. But it took me a while. Once we're in a marriage, now we're having these arguments that could have been complete small little things that could have been solved if I would have just spoke up instead of just holding it in, you know?
Not arguments, passionate
Passionate
conversations.
conversations, yeah.
We don't really raise our voice. Well,
We've never we never
he's never raised his voice at
no,
me ever. And that
no.
was one of my prayers because I was used to being in relationships where
Well,
I was
you've never
yelled
raised
at
your
all the
voice at
time.
me either, so
I feel like I've gotten loud, not like yelling at you, but I've gotten loud. And then you're like,
why are you raising your
why are you
voice?
raising your voice?
Yeah, I think
And then
sometimes you
I'm
feel
like,
like you have to raise your voice for me to hear you, and I'm just
I'm just loud.
yeah,
Like
and that's what I think. I
it's
think you're
just
just
what
like
it is.
I think you don't even hear yourself is the thing. I
Yeah.
think you think you're speaking in a regular voice, so when I'm like, "Why are you raising your voice?" It's like, "Oh, I didn't realize I was doing that." Like, "I can hear you just fine." That's usually what I say. "You know, I can hear you just fine, like, I'm right next to you."
Yeah.
Yeah.
So for my single people, I think a big thing during your single season is selflessness.
Mm,
And that was a hard one for me initially
mhm.
before we went into where God was waking me up to pray for you and all of those things. I definitely think that was my training ground of learning to be more selfless because I'm like, Lord, why you got me praying for him? I got a million things I want to pray for myself. You keep interrupting my sleep to pray for this man. But anyway, I think God was teaching me that selflessness that I had that when it came to like my child, like I would lay anything down for her.
Yeah,
But when it came to relationships, I think I was very selfish and I had to learn during my singleness
to be
to be more
selfless.
selfless because every day in marriage you're
Right. And
sacrificing.
a practical way to do that while you're single is you may not have a boyfriend or girlfriend yet or anything like that, but what you could be doing is starting to practice interceding for your friends, right?
Right.
Starting to do those things where you're praying for other people when you're selfless about that so that when that man or woman does come, interceding for others is not something new to you, right? You're
Right.
not struggling to get into that habit because
Yeah.
it's something that you've been practicing while you were single, while you had nobody. You were praying over your friends, you were interceding for your family members. And
Yeah.
so it becomes a natural thing when
Right.
God brings that person.
And I've said this, I said this during the live podcast, but anyway, God's been speaking to me a lot about the difference in prayers of intercession
Mm,
versus prayers and petitions.
right,
So petitions is when you are seeking the hand of God for all of the things in your life. Me, heal me from this, give me favor here, give me grace there. I want this, I need this, whatever, but you're spending little time interceding for other people.
right.
And that's a big thing is there's a big difference between intercession and petition and you have to have a good balance of that and really lean more to the side of interceding for others
Right,
than petitioning for the hand of God over your life about everything and you're
right.
never praying for anyone else.
And I think even when you're yeah, if you're interceding for other people, not making it so much about let them get this car, let them get this more. I think, but when think about intercession, I think about more going into spiritual warfare for certain people.
Yeah.
You know.
Yeah. For the next point, I want to talk about becoming versus finding.
Oh, okay.
So we want to find a spouse. We want to find someone to marry.
Yeah,
But I think our focus needs to be more on becoming the person that God wants you to be as a spouse
yeah,
for whoever he has for you in the
yeah,
future. Asking yourself important questions like, am I emotionally and spiritually healthy? And you may already be engaged and you haven't done this yet, but you need to do this soul searching before you get married and work out some of these things.
yeah,
Asking yourself, am I growing in my faith and in my intimacy with God? Am I drawing closer to God within this relationship?
yeah.
Am I healing from past hurts so that I'm not carrying unnecessary baggage into my future marriage?
And a big one: am I hearing from God? Am I hearing from God correctly? Can I discern the voice of God?
Yeah.
Because that's a period of time where the enemy will send a lot of counterfeits. And if you're not careful and you can't properly hear the voice of God, you'll find yourself in a relationship or a marriage that you were never meant to be in.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I think about the becoming a wife, I'm going to say wife because I'm a woman. So, becoming a wife, and I think about the scripture in Proverbs 18:22, where it says, he who finds a wife finds a good thing and receives favor from the Lord.
Mhm.
It says, he who finds a wife.
Right.
So it doesn't say he who finds a woman that then becomes his wife. Like it says he who finds a wife. So you're already a wife when you are found,
Right.
when it is biblically sound and it's the way that God intended it. You've been doing the work. He's been preparing that man. He's been preparing you. You've been drawing close to him. He has been healing your soul and shaping you into the wife that he's called you to be so that when that man is ready and you are ready and he's done shaping both of you,
Yeah.
that man finds you and you are wife material already. You are a wife.
Yeah. Yeah. When a man of God starts looking for that spouse, they're looking for a wife, they're not looking for a girlfriend. Right.
Exactly.
You're not looking for a girlfriend who is now gonna work on the small little things to become a wife, because then what if I came in and I've been ready, I've prepared myself. Now I have to wait for you to catch up, right?
Yeah.
And so I think you're so right in that as a man, we're looking for a wife. As a man of God, let me say that. As a man
Yes,
of
man of
God,
God.
we're looking for a wife. We're not looking for a girlfriend. So you have to make sure that you're preparing yourself, and whenever you're becoming a wife.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I mean, I expect that when you found me that you were a husband. You were already ready
Right.
to be a husband. You were ready to be the priest of our home. You had done the work with the Lord
Right.
to where you could lead in that way.
Too often people think that being a wife is when the ring goes on your finger, right?
Right.
That's when you become a wife. No, that's when you get labeled a wife. But you can become a wife even when you're single.
Right. Yeah. So I think about our story. And when we initially dated, it was, for a girlfriend.
Right. No, right. Because I can't say that I was becoming a husband at the time. And you probably
No,
can't say you were becoming a wife at the time,
no.
which is another reason why God just completely shut it down.
Yeah.
it,
Yeah.
it was about 7 months of dating and it was over for 2 years.
Yeah. And I actually, looking back at it now, as hard as that was, I'm kind of glad that we had that 2-year breakup
Oh,
because
yeah. Oh,
I
yeah.
look at people who have been in relationships where they've been a girlfriend for years and years and years. And I don't think I don't have the patience for that. I do not have the patience for that. And so if we had continued that course and then we're just like perpetually dating, that would have been
Because it's
so frustrating.
it's easier to become a wife or a husband by yourself. It's a lot harder when you're trying to become a wife or a husband while you're dating somebody, because there's just so much of a clash, and you're not, for one thing that gets in the way is having to focus on sexual purity when outside of that, it's a lot easier, right? It's a lot easier when the person's not around you all the time. So you can focus on other things, but now you're trying to focus on becoming a wife, becoming a husband, and at the same time struggling with being around this person all the time
And
and
having
and having
lustful
lustful
thoughts and
thoughts
all
and
of these
everything
things,
else.
and
So
it interferes with your ability to hear
right,
God
right,
and
right. So
God
becoming a
live for
wife or
him.
becoming a husband, you've got to do that while you're single, you
Yeah,
know.
yeah,
And I don't I say, let's say if you're already engaged or anything like that, it doesn't mean that, everything's lost or whatever. I think you can still just take time, both of you, and just really focus on whether it's a fast or whatever it is to focus on becoming the person you need to be, taking those steps that you need to do.
yeah. I mean, because you may have already taken the step and you're living together and you're
Yeah.
sleeping in the same bed and you're
Yeah.
doing all these things. And now you're like, wait, I've neglected of all of these other areas spiritually. I want to repent. I want to do things the right way. All is not lost. God can
No,
redeem
no.
anything. But you need to make steps. You need to set boundaries. Somebody
Right.
needs to sleep on the couch.
Right.
You need to take that time apart. It is going to benefit you so much in your
Right.
marriage, and it's so worth it to do that before you
And
get
then, and
married.
it's fine to say to each other, "Hey, let's take this time apart and really focus on God. We're not breaking up or anything like that,
Yeah,
but we'll take this time apart, focus on God, and focus on you becoming a husband, me becoming a wife. And when we come back together, we'll be where we need to be. Things, I promise you, things will be so much easier. So it's not a breakup. It's just a nice little departure or break for you to really focus on God and hear God about the steps that you need to take and actually implement the things that need to go into place for you to become a wife or become a husband. Because
yeah,
it's a lot more of a struggle when you're trying to do it while sleeping in the same bed or, being around each other all the time.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. True. Now I want to talk about the role of like community and mentorship. So one of my prayers for Festus, for my husband in general, when I was praying for my husband,
Mhm.
was that he would have godly mentors and receive godly counsel from older Christian men, especially married couples, that
Right.
type of thing. And I feel like when we're in the season of preparing for a wedding, we're getting all kinds of counsel during that time
Mhm.
from Pinterest, from
Right.
social
Right.
media, from wedding planners, from friends, as we're trying to plan this beautiful day. But we neglect the other type of counsel, the godly counsel, the stuff that's preparing you for a marriage, spending time around married couples,
Yeah.
healthy married couples. I
Right.
know there was a time in my single season where I didn't want to be around married people. I'm like, what I want to be around married people
Right,
for? For
right.
what?
No, we look at it now and we're like, man, being around married people, healthy, the thing is healthy married people, godly married people, it'll do a lot for you. I always say you can learn from people without having to ask them anything. You just watch, right?
Yeah,
And you can learn a lot. You can learn how quick they are to apologize, how affectionate they are, the small little things that you learn. And so it's not such a bad thing when you're single to be like, I have married friends. I'm going to go hang out with my married friends. Third wheeling is not always bad.
right. And I think that if you have a lot of bitterness inside of you where you can't really tolerate being like, oh, I don't want to hang out with married people because it just makes me sad and it makes me think so much about my singleness.
Yeah,
Then you need a heart check. You
right,
need to spend some time with the Lord because it shouldn't impact you that way.
right,
It
right.
should give you hope. It should get you excited. You should be looking that as an opportunity for even discipleship. I
Yeah,
remember listening to a podcast, I can't remember who it was, and the woman who is now married, she was talking about how during her single season she would spend time, she considered it discipleship when she would be around a married woman and just see the things that she was doing from day to day with taking care of her kids, taking care of the home and cooking dinner, things like that. And it kind of helped me when I listened to that podcast because I was in this season of being so busy and I'm like, I want to pour into other women,
mhm,
but I don't have time for discipleship. I have too many things to do.
mhm.
But discipleship doesn't mean that you have to stop everything that you're doing and have these deep conversations. Like you literally could just
Right.
have a single person in your home, or you could be a single person in a married person's home and just like there, just observing, just because there's so much that you can learn
From observing.
from just observing
Yeah,
and seeing how they carry themselves
yeah.
and how
And
they
it
do
might open
things.
your eyes and you might be like, you know what? I thought I was ready for marriage, but I'm
Maybe
not.
I'm not. Maybe I need a little bit more time.
I
It
need a
may
bit
give
more
you
time.
more appreciation from your single season when you can get away from them kids and go home to your quiet
Yeah.
place.
Yeah, because when you get married, you ain't giving them away to nobody.
Right.
Babysitter can only be available so often.
Yeah. When I think of women that I know who are good examples of women that are stewarding their single season well, you guys don't see her in person on here a lot, but she's very near and dear to us. Her name's Darian. She helps us behind the scenes a lot with the podcast, with moderating and things like that.
Yeah,
And she is, to me, her and Jordan both are prime example of what it looks like to be stewarding your single season well.
yeah.
And she jokes around sometimes and says, "Man, I really need some single friends because all of my friends are married," because she's always around married people. But it's like a joke. She's like,
Yeah.
she's become family and she pours into us as well.
Yeah, just as much as we poured into her, but I think
And we
what's
pray
great
over
is
her. So if it's the right people, like they're praying over you, they're interceding
right.
for you during your single season, it's helping lift you up. And so
And what
it's
I
not a
love is
bad
that
thing.
when it comes time for her to get married, I have no doubt she'll be an amazing wife, right?
Yeah.
And there's
Yeah.
no doubt at all just by watching her steward her waiting season. So it's I just love having that around and it's not even for married folk out there. Like it's not anything for us to be around her and feel like we're not doing anything more than we normally would, right? To disciple
Yeah.
her in any
No.
way. We're not doing
No.
anything.
No.
She's just
If anything,
watching
she's
us.
helping us a lot because
Right,
she's helping with
right,
I mean, she helps us so much.
right. So
And so it's a blessing. It's
it's
definitely
a
a
blessing.
tremendous blessing for us. And
And
it's also a blessing that we're able to
yeah, and I
pour
think
into her
at the end of the
too.
day, you realize that it goes both ways,
Yeah.
right? So don't
It's
feel like
mutual
it
sacrifice.
is. Don't feel like because I'm single, there's nothing that I can offer them.
Yeah.
It's not like that because you may be the person that's maybe helping watch their kids, helping do different things around the house, but what it's really doing is training you to be a wife or a
And
husband.
it's not just that, you're sowing seeds.
Right.
You're
Right.
sowing seeds. I remember one time I was feeling guilty about asking Darian to watch the kids for us so that we could like we were going somewhere or a date night, something that we needed to do. We were going to a wedding. And Ludi said to me, our friend Ludi, who's also married, she was like, don't feel guilty about that. She wants to do it
Yeah.
and she's sowing seeds
Right.
for her future
Right.
marriage and when she has children. And,
Right.
so also as a single person, I wish I was a single mom. So I didn't do as much of this, but I wish I would have, just served in that way and said to a married couple that I know probably hadn't had a date night in forever with young kids, like, let me watch the kids for you so you guys could go out and have some time to yourself. I wish I would have done more of that
Yeah.
during my single season and spent more time with married couples.
Yeah. Yeah. I think too often you're friends with somebody, they get married, and you slowly start to pull yourself back because you're like, well, they can't do this anymore. They can't do this anymore. Well, maybe you shouldn't be doing that anymore either if you're really trying to be married too.
Right.
You know?
Darian has been around with us for over 10 years. She's been friend, now family.
Yeah.
And so she was around for our single season.
Right.
She was friends
Right.
with us when we were single
Right.
before we got engaged and got married.
Right.
So being able to see that transition and
Yes.
now we're 7 years in and all of that. So
Learning from our
she's
mistakes.
she's she's gotten to see all of that.
Yeah.
So definitely my single friends don't push your married friends out the door once they get married,
Yeah.
especially if it's healthy marriages,
Yeah.
because it's really is a blessing to be able to see that,
Right.
especially when you grew up not having a lot of examples of it.
Right. One thing you said, you mentioned praying for me to have godly counsel and people like that. And what just popped into my head is how the timing of that, because I think when we broke up, that's when I met Pastor Dave, the pastor that married
That
us.
married us.
Right. So it's interesting that when
If
you
you're
start
watching,
praying,
Pastor Dave, we
we
love
love you, Pastor Dave.
you.
You're the best. My man, David Roman. All right. So, but it's interesting the time because you started praying for that. And quickly after, I
You
meet
went, like, on a mission
I
trip or
meet him and
something,
we
and
go on
that's
a
how you
mission
met?
trip and we form this bond, and he becomes the pastor who later marries us.
Yeah.
And I'm just not putting it together that you had a prayer for me to find godly counsel, for me to find people that I can go to, and that's who he was.
Yeah. And it says in the Bible, in Proverbs, it says, "Where there is no counsel, the people fall." And but in the multitude of counselors, there is safety. And so the Bible tells us that. And it's so important to have godly mentors and
Yeah,
counselors, especially when you're preparing for marriage.
yeah, yeah.
So you got a wedding planner, but you don't have a mentor.
Whew.
How does that make sense?
Yeah.
You're preparing for the one day, but you ain't preparing for the lifetime.
Uh-huh.
So we gotta get our priorities right.
Yeah, yeah. You're having pre-wedding meetings, but you don't have premarital classes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
all of that. But yeah, Pastor Dave had to check you a little bit.
He did not check
He didn't
me.
check you. He
He
gave you wise
gave me
counsel
wise counsel, very wise counsel. I love you, Dave.
because Festus had a lot of female
Yeah,
friends.
yeah. I don't know if I think we talked about
I
it
don't we did on the live
on the
podcast,
live
but we
podcast,
haven't
but
talked about it
basically,
on
yeah.
here. So
Basically, I'm in two female dominated careers with modeling and nursing, right? So naturally, I always had a lot of female friends. And Jen noticed, she was like, this might be a problem when we get married. So she was like, before we get married, I'm gonna need you to just go talk to Pastor Dave about having female friends.
but it wasn't just that simple because women's intuition and we discern things.
Yeah,
And even
yeah.
Pastor Dave told you there are things that we see and we discern that like go straight over y'all's head. So we will see that woman that is lusting after you in the corner of the church. Like we see these things and we're there to bring it to your attention to protect you
Yeah,
and I was having a conversation with Ludi the other day. This is why the whole thing of submission to the point of where a woman can't speak or is completely passive is not
Mm-mm.
biblical
No,
because that's not helping her
no.
husband.
Right.
But, that's not what submission is
Mm.
because a woman should still have a voice in her marriage.
Always,
You still
always.
have to be able to speak up about things because we're there to be your helper, to
Yeah,
help protect you. And
yeah.
so if I see danger and I can't tell you about it because I have to submit and keep my mouth shut,
That's not submission.
how is that helping you?
Right.
That's, putting us both in danger.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
that was a
Submission
tangent, but
submission is not keeping your mouth shut, and
yeah.
that's what too many people think it is, right?
Yeah, it's really
She's
sad
supposed to
that that's
submit to
what
me,
it
so whatever I say goes. It does. That's not
right.
submission.
And submission is twofold.
Right.
It goes
Right.
both ways.
Mhm. Mhm.
And so we've talked about that on here anyway, but so that is the mentorship
Yeah.
piece. And Pastor Dave told you that to be careful.
He told me be careful. He just basically told me, listen, when you get married, perception does matter. Because I think I've always thought, if you're not doing anything wrong, why does it, I'm innocent in any of this. But one thing he did tell me, perception does matter because once you're married, what she thinks actually affects your marriage, whether it's true or not. So you have to be mindful of what's going on around you to make sure that you don't give her a perception of you doing something wrong, even if you're not.
Because the enemy's gonna use it. He's
Right.
gonna
The
try to
enemy's gonna
make
use
it
it.
look
The enemy's
okay.
gonna wait till you all are having a fight and then bring up that one time that you did something that it was innocent, but because she's and I don't want to say fight, when you are having an argument or something, a
Disagreement.
disagreement or something, but the enemy's gonna wait for the moment, for that moment and be like, oh, let me bring to her attention that, he did this or he did that, even though it was innocent.
Yeah,
Right. But then that perception gets in and it gets magnified by the situation or the argument that's going on, and
right,
then before you know it, it's completely overblown.
right.
And it all starts with perceiving something that wasn't true. You can't just be thinking about, am I right or am I wrong, or am I innocent, right? Because you could be innocent, but if she perceives it as you doing something wrong, it's still going to affect your marriage.
Yeah. And I was in that time discerning that there was somebody that had feelings for Festus that was just supposed to be a friend that he only saw as a friend.
Hmm.
But it was clear that she had feelings. To me, it was. He didn't see it, but I was discerning that in my spirit. And I wasn't wrong. And that, we figured all that out later. But there's going to be situations like that. And so when you have friends of the opposite sex, if when you are now getting married, they aren't making an effort to be friends with your spouse. So now all of the friends that the ones
Yeah.
he still has that
Yeah.
he had before we got married, they made an effort to know me, to
Yeah.
get to know me, to
Yeah.
become friends with me as well.
Yeah.
And now some of them, I'm more friends
More
with
friends with
them
them
than
than
you
me.
are,
Well,
but
yeah, she stole my friends, y'all.
so I
She
stole
stole
some
my
of
friends.
Fes's
But
friends.
yeah, I agree. I think that's the thing is like when you have opposite sex friends,
Somebody has feelings.
when you
A
do get
lot of times somebody has feelings.
sometimes.
A lot of
But
time.
I think when you do get married, I think they have to, like you said, they have to make a conscious effort to get to know that other your spouse. And
Right.
if they're not, then you can't be friends with them if they're not going to be friends with your wife or your husband.
They can't just be texting at all
No,
hours of
like
like, there has to be boundaries
right,
in place, and so
right,
you need to start establishing those boundaries before you get married.
right. That's true. Yeah,
And all of that can I couldn't communicate that to Festus the way it needed to be communicated.
right,
It needed to come from a married, wise counsel,
right. And so if
a
I didn't,
man.
and honestly, if
So
I didn't have godly counsel that you had been praying for me about, I would have just been like, I know I'm not
you're
doing nothing wrong. I've always been
overreacting.
friends with these people. They've never tried anything. It's nothing there, so I'm not going to change anything just because you think you see something.
Right.
That's how I would have reacted. But having Pastor Dave and talking to him and getting his wise counsel, that opened my eyes. And I received it a lot different than I would have received it from her because sometimes as men, when a woman tells us something, you're going to see it as, oh, she's jealous, right? But if your boy tells you that, hey, this is what I see and this is what's going on, you're going to take it a little bit more serious because it's not coming from what's the word? It's coming from a more neutral place,
Right.
right? It's coming from a more neutral place, and he has no reason to want to be jealous, you know?
Right.
So that was very critical for me to be able to go to a godly person about it. And I'm glad that you didn't just say, "Hey, this, that, this." All you said was, "I need you to talk to Pastor Dave before we get married
Yeah.
about having female
Yeah.
friends."
'Cause I learned a lot during my single season how much more control I had through prayer versus bringing things up, fighting, or trying to argue a point. Like, I wasn't fighting in my flesh anymore. I was fighting in the spirit. So I already knew I had been praying for his mentorship and praying for godly counsel. And I had already seen God move in those areas. So I knew he wasn't gonna,
Right.
fail me in this. So I just simply said, well, you have mentorship. Go talk to them. Let's
Yeah,
talk
no,
to them.
I love what you said there is that you actually have more control in your prayer than you do like with your partner when there's an argument. So something I've said before, like when we have an argument or something and I can't and I honestly don't want to say that I'm right and I don't think that you're right. Oh, I go to God with it. I just go to God and all I say is God convict whichever one of
Whichever one
us
is.
needs
Yeah.
conviction in
Mhm.
this situation. And it works every
And
time.
sometimes I'll just come to him and I'll be saying I'm sorry. And I don't know why I'm saying I'm
Yeah,
sorry.
like
I
she'll come
just
up
like
and be
during
like,
my quiet time, the Lord is like, go apologize to him. I'm like, what am I apologizing for? But I've learned to just be obedient and do it
right.
and whatever.
So sometimes it'll catch me off guard and she'll come to me and be like, I'm sorry. I'm like, sorry for what? It's like, oh, I didn't say that prayer, you know? And vice versa. I'll go
Yeah.
to her and be like, I'm sorry, you know?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
So you actually have more control in your prayer.
yeah.
Don't try to argue with that person. Don't do it. Just go to God and tell God, hey, you check them for me.
Right. Because my daddy don't
Or
play. I
check
say that
me.
all the time.
Right. Don't
Well,
just put it
yeah,
on
or
them. You
check
check
me.
you check whoever needs to be checked.
And he does check me.
Yeah.
Okay. So after the godly mentorship,
Mhm.
I think a good point is God's timing versus society's timing,
Ooh,
and the
that's good.
timing that society puts on
Yeah.
when you should be married by, because your biological clock, or you need to do it this way. And
Yeah.
or family even putting pressure on you, like, how come you're not married yet? When are you getting married? When are you having
That's
kids?
a big
All
one.
of these things, I think that's a big one, especially culturally,
Yeah.
for a lot of people. And so we get so swayed by that that we don't think about God's timing and
Mhm.
God's timing being perfect,
Mhm.
because we have all of this noise and all of these pressures around us
Yeah.
about
And the
when to get married.
and I think that's what I was mentioning earlier is just making sure that, while you're single, you really learn to hear the voice of God because you need to be able to tune out everybody else and let the voice of God tell you when to step into something, right? Especially with relationships, because you can't step into a relationship because, oh, my mom said, when you gonna give me these grandbabies, when
Right.
you gonna
Right.
give me these grandbabies? So this opportunity comes with this guy or this girl, and you're like, all right, let me do it because my mom is. I don't know how long she's gonna be around. I want her to be able to see her grandkids, or it doesn't matter. The only voice that you should be able to hear or you should be focused on is God's voice and His timing and not being influenced by the people around you and the timeline that they want you to have.
Yeah. Yeah. That's a big one. Remember that God's timing is perfect.
Right.
Don't let society or family pressure you into feeling like you're behind, because God's timing is perfect. Just things being delayed doesn't mean that it's denied. It doesn't mean that you're never going to get married. It doesn't mean any of that. Delay does not mean denied. So you really have to trust in God and just keep leaning into Him. I know people say it's so easy for you to say that once you're married, and I get that. I get that, but, um, don't lose hope.
Yeah. Yeah. I think, yes, I agree. It is easier to say it when you're married. Right. But it doesn't mean it's not true.
That's true. Yeah.
So, yeah, don't get discouraged. Your wife or your husband is coming in God's proper timing. And no matter what anyone else says, like their timing, what they think is delay is actually God's perfect time. So just focus on what God says to you, learn to hear His voice, and find comfort and peace in Him, and know that at the proper time, He's going to bring that person for you.
I definitely think it would have taken us longer if we hadn't broken up and like leaned into God's timing, it would have taken us longer to get to marriage. We would have been one of those people that dated for a long time
Right. If I didn't know how to
because
hear God's voice,
Festus moves at a snail's pace when it comes
I move
to
at a godly pace. Thank
everything.
you very
Oh, okay,
much.
yes.
Yes,
Yes.
yes.
Okay, I'll rebuke
I
myself for
don't
saying
move
that.
till God says move. Thank you.
But back then, I'm talking about before we broke up,
Oh,
when
before we
you
broke up,
weren't
yeah, no.
really in tune with God and you
Yeah.
weren't really like
Before we broke up.
didn't have that level of
Mm,
intimacy with him.
right, right.
So
I
the
agree.
moving at a snail's pace was more like out of fear. It wasn't spirit led.
I mean, I was moving at a snail's pace. You were moving at a horse's pace.
What is a
Yeah, I don't
horse's
know. What is
pace?
a hare? The hare and the tortoise? Yeah. I just think of something fast. A horse is fast, right?
So we
Or
would
a
have
cheetah.
been
You were moving at a cheetah's
we would have
pace.
been waiting forever, and then also because you wouldn't have been drawing close to God the way that you needed to, you wouldn't have Festus does not move without having once you got to that level
Yeah.
of intimacy with God, you do not move on things without having clear
Oh,
instruction
yeah.
from him.
Yeah, for
And you
sure.
can't get that clear instruction and you can't hear him when you're distracted because of, you know, relationships you shouldn't be in, sexual sin, things
Yeah.
like that.
Yeah.
And you didn't have those distractions, you and God. And same with me. It was just me and God during that time. And I do think it's actually sped up the process for us.
Yeah, yeah. I think one thing that I really do value that I learned in my single season was being able to move at God's pace and being able to hold on until God says go. And it even comes into life now. Even when we think about things like, should we move to this city or should we move to that city? I'm always like, well, God ain't said nothing yet, so we
I
gonna stay
tried to
right
get
here.
Festus to move to
She
Atlanta.
she tried to get us to move to Atlanta because we had put in, like, a bunch of offers for a house here, and she was like, we could get a much bigger house in
Our
Atlanta."
money will go a lot further in
I was
Atlanta. I was
like
ready to
"All
go.
right, yeah,
And like one
when
of my
God
best
tells me."
friends lived there. I was ready to go. And
I
he
was
was like,
like
well, God didn't tell me that.
I was like, "God didn't tell me that, so when he tells me that, I'll come back to you and we can move."
But
And then shortly after that, we found the house that is our forever home.
well, I'm not gonna say it's for our forever home,
Yeah, she
but
wants another house.
not right now. But I don't put God in a box.
That's true.
This
That's true.
isn't
Maybe
forever.
God will give us a mansion one day.
I don't know what it's gonna be, but I'm not putting him in a box.
Yeah.
Anyway, the next point that I wanted to talk about was the marriage covenant mindset versus a contract mindset.
Mhm.
And I feel like in the world, marriage is a contract to people.
Right. It can be broken.
And that's the mindset that people have. That is a contract that can be broken when it's no longer benefits you and or when things get rough and stuff like that. It's
Yeah.
not a covenant before God, like lifelong till death do you part.
Right. Right. I agree with that because I think a lot of people just look at it as well. If things are not going right, I can always bail.
Yeah, and that's
Right.
why people will rush into marriage.
Yeah.
Like you can rush into a marriage, you can marry someone that
Because you know that you can walk
you
away from it.
haven't received confirmation from because, divorce is an option.
Right. But if you're a true Christian, you're a true child of God, divorce is not an option because, like you said earlier, it was never meant to be that way.
Right. And even in the Bible, in Matthew chapter 16, where Jesus is talking to the Pharisees about divorce and all of that, I think when it gets to like verse 10 or so, the apostles, they understood what Jesus was saying about divorce not really being an option outside of, adultery and things like that. And they understood the weight of that and the weight of the covenant of marriage. And so then they even said, so maybe it just wouldn't even be worth it to get married
Right. Right.
because of how clear you need to be that marriage is, for you
Yeah.
and you're going to fight.
So it even takes me back to what we were talking about earlier about the pressures. What I would say now is if you have the family members or the friends that are pressuring you and they're saying, when are you going to get married? When are you going to have kids? All these other things. All you need to say is, listen, I value the covenant of marriage and I do not see it as a contract. Therefore, there is no breaking it. So I will take my time and let the Lord speak to me about when to enter that covenant so that I know that it's a true covenant. It's not something I can walk away from. And that's why I'm waiting.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And we are not in any way bashing people that are divorced because there
No,
are,
no.
there's abusive relationships, there's
Right, right.
relationships where, you've been abandoned, and all of that is in the
We're talking
Bible
about
as,
we're talking about
grounds for
divorce as
divorce.
in things get a little tough and you walk away.
Inconvenient. Things
Right,
get inconvenient.
inconvenience, right.
So you cancel the contract.
Right, because there are grounds, like you said, there are grounds for divorce, yes,
Yeah.
infidelity, that kinda stuff. But, yeah, just walking away because things got a little hard and you don't wanna deal and communicate and all that, or somebody else looks more appealing, that kinda divorce, yeah, we don't condone.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly. To wrap things up,
Mhm.
some encouragement
Yeah,
and takeaways
yeah,
for my engaged people and our single
and
people.
single
So, for the engaged people, we're just here to say that invest in your marriage. Don't spend all your time only investing your time, your thoughts, your energy into a wedding that one day. Start investing in your marriage and building that foundation.
right, right. I think make sure that your marriage is the primary thing and your wedding is a secondary
Yeah.
thing. There's nothing worse than putting all your energy into a wedding and some kind of bitterness comes out because you guys are going back and forth, and then the way that you start your marriage is in bitterness. Once the wedding's over, everybody leaves. That
Mhm.
first day you're bitter about the things that you guys did during the wedding planning process, and now you start your marriage
Right.
with bitterness.
Or you put so much energy and things are going to go wrong on that day. Like it just
Yes.
happens. Like,
Right.
I mean, but we were so like wrapped up in the marriage. There was something that we paid for with the DJ that it was like something that we paid for that
Mhm.
we didn't even notice.
Yeah,
It
that's
that
true.
it wasn't until weeks later that we're like, you know what, we paid for it, and this didn't even happen. But we didn't get wrapped up
Right.
in those details,
No,
and
and
so don't. Things are gonna go wrong. Don't be so wrapped up in the
yeah, and
wedding day
I
that
think
you miss.
even something that like I said before earlier, if you're gonna put the effort into your wedding, make sure you put that same effort into your marriage. I know something that I did that you weren't aware of. I surprised you with the drapes that you
Oh,
wanted.
the drapery
Yeah,
from the
the drapery
ceiling.
that you
It was
wanted.
expensive, and I
And
didn't
she didn't
want us
want
to
it and
spend money
everything.
on
So
it.
I made sure I was able to surprise her. But what it also said to me was when you get married, you better continue to surprise her. And so that's something that I continue to do because I'm not going to do it for the wedding, but not for the marriage.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, just like you say vows at the wedding,
Right.
but are you really ready
Are you
to
going to
live
live those
those vows
vows in
out within the marriage, or are you
right?
just saying it because it
Right.
sounds good on that day
Right. So whatever you're going to put your effort and time into for the wedding, you better make sure it carries over into your
into your
marriage.
marriage? Yeah.
Yeah.
And then for my single people, your waiting season is not wasted. God is preparing you. There's no wasted time here. It really isn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
Focus on your spiritual growth, emotional healing, finding your purpose, those things before marriage.
And don't feel pressured. Move at God's pace. That's what I'll say.
And don't
Um,
settle.
yeah.
Don't
Don't settle.
settle
'Cause
because you think that it's taking too long and you're behind. Don't settle. That's the worst thing you could do.
What settling would do to you is make you take longer because then you're gonna backtrack and have to start over again with somebody else.
Right.
So don't settle. Just wait on the person that God has for you. God does have that person. You focus on God. Like it says, seek first the kingdom and all else will be added. Right. So just worry about your relationship with God and the relationship with man or woman will come.
Yeah. And I've said this on here before, but I always pray that still to this day that the desires of my heart will be aligned with God's will for my life. And so I find that that is helpful even in things that I'm waiting for, or when I begin to say those prayers, my prayers and my desires begin to shift, and then something that I might have wanted or been eager for in this season is no longer a desire. I have more patience and I'm like, oh, because it's no longer just my flesh. Like I'm aligned truly with what God has for me. And so in Psalm 37, verse 4, it says, delight in the Lord and he will give you the desires of your heart. And when I think about delighting in something, I think about just pouring my life into something, being happy, finding joy in my presence and my relationship with the Lord. And then your desires fall in line with Him because you're like just in step with Him. And those other things that you can get wrapped up in worrying about taking too long, like meeting someone or a marriage, it doesn't feel as heavy.
Yeah. Yeah.
So
That's good.
that is my
That's your takeaway?
that's my final takeaway.
All right.
But oh, last thing,
Yeah.
Soul Care. Read
Yeah.
I we cannot
Yeah, we can't
recommend this
stress
book
that enough.
enough. We probably will keep mentioning it
Every
on
episode.
every episode, and we have been going through the book with our Patreon community. If you're not on
Yes.
Patreon, join us on Patreon. So,
We
we've been
do
going through each of the
we
principles,
do a
and
Zoom
then
call.
we come
We get to
together for
speak
a
to each
Zoom
other.
call, and we discuss and dive deep into whatever the topic is for that week, and we have gotten really good feedback, and even people that I've recommended the book to who
Right.
aren't doing soul care with us, family members, things like that. I really think we should just give that away as Christmas gifts for
Right.
everybody because it's that valuable.
Right.
We've had people, family members tell us, thank you for recommending this book. It's really changing my life.
Yeah.
And so that's why we can't recommend it enough. If we link it in the description of every episode now, because we want so badly for people to
Find freedom.
receive that freedom and find that freedom that we did from going through that soul care process. And it's
Yeah.
still fresh for us because we
Yeah.
just did it at the end of last year. So the book is called Soul Care by Rob Reimer. I don't know. If you happen to ever
It's
see
linked.
this, Pastor Rob, and would like to come on our podcast, we would love to
We would
interview
love
you
to talk about your book. Yes.
because it has been such a blessing to us and so many of the people connected to us and people that we've been sharing the book with
Yeah.
on our platform. So it will be linked in the
Make
description.
sure you get it. And if, you want to join us for us going through it together, join our Patreon. That's all linked in the description.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we will see you next week.
All right. Peace.